probably hear me. That's better. Hi there, I'm Anthony. I'm going to be working on a painting that I started a while ago, and I've been meaning to finish it, so I thought this would be a good time for it. This is Hintersee Lake, which is, I think, in Sweden, and so I had worked on the clouds already, worked on the mountains. I think they're mostly done. I'm going to be mainly focusing on the bottom half today. There's some trees going along the edge of the water, and I'm going to just switch over now so you can see this is what we're going to be looking at while I'm live here. So you can see I've got my palette up there. This is where I'm going to be putting all my paint, and then down on the bottom left is the reference photo that I'm using to work on this. I want to go over the mountains a little bit more, just to make them a little bit bluer. Sometimes things look different after you've added a few things in, and you go back to look at something you did earlier. It might need a little bit more work. So that's basically where we're at. So just to start out here, I'm looking at what I want for the bottom colors, and I think I'm going to get maybe only like 2 or 3 colors here probably for a lot of what I need. And I'm going to take a look now at which colors I get. I've got a bunch of different greens. I know which one I want to get. I have a lot of paint over here, so I can find it. So I used to use a color called sap green. Of course, that is what's known as a chromophore as far as the type of pigment that it's made with. And chromophores right now are being reevaluated because basically how fast they fade might not be as accurate as what we had thought we had for the rating system for that. So I switched over to mixture of Viridian, which is a very popular green, and a color I like called transparent yellow oxide, and the two of them together works really well to get a nice kind of earthy green, and you can kind of control exactly how much green versus the gold color you want. So I'm not really using a ton of paint here. Maybe I'll get a little bit more than that. And I'm also going to probably be adding in some cadmium yellow light after a while. I think I'm going to just put some color down and see how it looks to start out. And the way you lay out your palette sometimes is important for this. I'm not going to be using a lot of colors, so I think it's not as important probably. But just to start, I will just mix these up here. And so this is a very, very transparent color on the right. The Viridian's a little bit transparent, but not quite as much. So the two together are going to look pretty dark here until I add something together with it. It's kind of like a dark brown, so you need a little bit more green in there. This is a very small working area, but this painting is not extremely large, so that'll be okay. If I was working on something bigger, I'd want to use more paint and have a bigger area. I'm using a palette knife here just to mix this up. Some people don't really use a palette knife for mixing as much. Just use a brush, but this is how I do it for a lot of the time when I'm starting out. So I'm thinking I've already got a lot of darks in here for the trees on the left. I can maybe go over that a little bit more to make it darker, but I'm thinking maybe I want to start off doing some of the lighter tree areas over here where the sun is hitting it. Looks like the background area, the sun's not really hitting the mountains as much for a lot of it. So I think actually now I'm going to get some of that cadmium yellow out. And this is just how I paint. Like I start out with a plan, start doing it. A lot of the times I'll just see I want to do something else because I'm noticing that would be better. Okay, so I'll just make a little adjustment here. One second. Okay, I'll lower the music a little bit. See if that's maybe better volume there. How about maybe down here? Okay, maybe that'll be better. Okay, so I'm going to use, I've got cadmium yellow medium and light. They're kind of similar colors. I think I'm going to go with the light. And I use this combination a lot for doing plants. It's important when you're painting green, when you're painting plants like this. Oh, got some oil. I want to just separate that. It's important to try to make sure that the green is not too dull, because then it looks kind of dead. And you want to make sure it's also not too saturated, because then it doesn't look natural. You don't want the trees looking like they're plastic. So I'm going to just separate this over here. Deal with this later. Sometimes the oil separates like that after a while. So I'll just kind of set it on the side for now. It's best not to mix it into the paint because it'll just be too runny and doesn't really give you anything all that helpful. So I'm going to just put a little bit of this yellow in here. The cadmium is a very opaque color, so it really shows up well, especially against a transparent color and another one that's a little bit transparent, semi. So I've got a pretty good color here for just what I need for the trees. Now, this is not quite light enough. Sometimes I'll do this where I just hold my palette knife up, kind of compare if that's the right color I want. Of course, you have to get it at the right angle to really be able to see how it looks. I think maybe it's looking pretty close to what I want for this lighter area hitting the tops of the trees. Now, the way I did this is intentional, doing the background first. This is usually how you paint landscapes, where you do the clouds, you do the background that's the furthest away, then you do a little bit closer, and you keep going closer and closer, and overlap a little bit as you're doing each part. Doing it the other way around, you can do it that way too, but it's just not always as convenient. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more of this. I think I want maybe a little more green in here, so it's just a little bit less kind of dull looking. This is, again, not really a lot of color, so I'm just kind of getting the color I want, and then I'll make a little bit more of it. So just going to compare now again. If you really don't check the color in the beginning, if you're going to be doing a lot of little details like this, if the color's not exactly right, and then you do a whole bunch of work, then you can always go back and fix it, but it's not very convenient. If you just get the color right in the beginning, you might not have to go back and fix all these different areas. Alright, so I'm going to just mix up more of this, because I think this is looking pretty good here. And eventually, once I start working on the painting for a while and I don't need as much color mixed up, I may start just mixing with my brush sometimes. But if you're just mixing with the brush, the way I'm using the palette knife now, if you're using a brush doing that instead of the palette knife, you don't really get as much paint. So I can just mix this big kind of amount here. It's not really that big, but enough that I can use it for a while before having to go back and mix it again. So that's why I like just using the palette knife. I think I'm going to get a little bit more yellow because I'm already out of it. But this might be actually almost enough for what I need. Sometimes I'll make a gradient going from a dark to a light, or two different colors, and I can just go in there with whatever I need for the different part of the painting I'm working on and just use it. It's already pre-mixed, so it's also a nice way to speed things up. So I think actually this might be enough for now. Depending on how thick you paint, you may need a lot of paint for certain things or not so much. I tend to paint on the thinner side. So I think I'm going to get a brush now And I want something not too firm, maybe kind of like a medium firm or a little bit on the softer side. I think I'm going to use a filbert, which is my favorite kind of brush at the moment. So that's a slightly longer, well, some of them are longer, some of them are not quite as long, but it's got a little bit of a rounded shape on the edge there. So let's see, it's just not completely 90 degrees on each side. So it gives it a little bit of a softer look than some of the other brushes that are shaped that way. And sometimes there's one brush that's definitely the best to use for certain things. Other times you could use several different ones and they'd all be fine. Just depends on what you're working on. So now for this, I'm not going to do everything 100% as detailed as you see it, but I'm just going to kind of hint at what I'm doing here. Like, basically when I'm painting outside, I'm painting a little bit like how I would do painting outdoors if I was painting plein air, which is just painting outside. And feeling like I want this a little bit brighter, so I'm going to get a little bit more of that yellow actually, mix it in there. Sometimes this will happen where things seem okay, but then actually put it on the painting and I decide I want more. So you want to constantly be looking at your painting and seeing what's working and what's maybe not what you want. Even if things, like I was saying about the mountains, even if they seem like they're good at one point, you think they're done, after a while you may see that they're not actually the right color, not dark enough, or whatever the case may be. So I'll try this one now, so you can see the difference here between the original color and then the new one. So I'm going to try this. I think this may be more what I need. Okay, it's maybe a little too bright, so I'm going to just actually mix the two of them together. I think that'll be... So now I'm using my brush now just to get the color between those two, because I already have a bunch of paint mixed up. Alright, so I'm feeling like that's pretty good right there. So you can turn the brush as you're painting. Here's the camera. Turn it sideways to get more narrow lines, or the other way to get wider ones. I'm doing these little narrow places now, and I'm actually going to back away from the painting a little bit so that I can see it further away, and that helps with just being able to draw or to paint things without getting too caught up in the little tiny details, because I can definitely do that. Sometimes I really try not to, but it's just, I have to restrain myself from going crazy with it. Now there's a little bit of an edge going along the trees here, so I'm going to kind of just tap that in there for a few places also, because you don't really see the edges of the trees in some places. You just see the tops lit up. So you want to always be looking at your reference if you're painting realism. You want to really look at the reference closely and pay attention to what's actually happening there instead of making it up too much. If you just look at the picture one time for a few seconds and then don't bother looking at it again for 10 minutes, your mind is going to start making up what it thinks is supposed to be there. It's not necessarily going to look like you want it. Now also at the same time, I don't want to make this line too solid here, so I'm going to just try to leave a little gap here and there between these trees. And I'm also looking at how far over this needs to go until it gets to the section where there is kind of an island, or that's just a edge of the lake that is changing direction, and there's a lot of dark trees right there that are getting bigger. But it kind of looks like they're going behind those trees because they're all of a sudden they're much bigger. So that's directly below this peak here, kind of right around this place. So I'm going to mark this out and kind of use this as a little landmark here. Oop, just hit my easel. Whenever I get paint on my easel, I like to wipe it off, because if I don't, it'll end up in lots of different places. Some people paint and they get paint everywhere. I try to just paint as clean as I can, because I don't want it on my forehead by the time I'm done. But it happens. Especially when you're working with toxic colors, you want to be careful. Cadmium is definitely not something you want to get in your mouth. Okay. Some of my students just kind of can't seem to get through a single session without getting paint somewhere it doesn't belong on their hands or arms or whatever. And sometimes that happens when you're opening a tube and it kind of squirts out a little bit, which can be annoying. And then the other time is if you're picking it up on the edges and there's paint all over. That can definitely happen then also. So now I want to get these trees in here in a way that it's not too regular, because then it doesn't look as real. There needs to be a sort of a random look about it. I already painted in some of the darker areas in the trees here, so there's one right over here I painted, which I think I might have put in the wrong spot, unless I'm looking at the wrong place. There's actually just one area right here. There's this part that comes down. I think I'm going to just use that. This one tree kind of is standing out right there more than some of the others. Anytime you're painting things that are organic, you just want to be careful, sort of like I was saying about the color, getting it just right as far as how light, how saturated, or how kind of muted it is. You want to just make sure that things don't look too regular, because then they don't look believable. So another thing I do a lot is squint when I'm looking at the reference. Just looking at it on screen, you may not be able to see it all that large, but just squinting helps to reduce things down to like a more basic form where the shapes and the light and dark are more kind of grouped together. There's not as much happening that you have to look at, so you can see the bigger parts together. So that helps sometimes to be able to make sure that you're getting things in the right place, because all the stuff that's on there, especially if I'm not painting some of the details, then what I'm painting is not going to look the same as what's on the screen, or whatever reference you're using. Now that I'm looking at it, I have a bunch of this yellow in here that I've done. I feel like it's a little bit extra light actually, so maybe that first green, maybe I need to go a little bit closer to that. So I'm actually going to switch over. I'm going to get just a little bit of the darker green and put that in there, because I feel like this is maybe just a little bit too far for what I want. I can always go back over it and just have some darker green and fix it up, but this next section here, let me just switch this up a little bit. You'll notice also I'm holding the brush pretty far back here, and that's an easy way to be able to not get too close to the painting and see what it looks like from far away. If you ever go to an opening or something, then artists go like this as soon as they see a painting a lot of the time. Most people don't do that, and they just look at it from 5 feet away. So the further away you can get from the painting, the more you're going to be seeing it from the distance that most people will look at it when it's done and it's on a wall. But some people will look at the brush strokes a little bit, but artists look at things a little differently. Anytime you make things, you know what goes into making it, so you're not going to see it the same way as people that don't do that. So I think I'm liking this a little bit better now as far as how bright it looks compared to this over here, but I think maybe I want to get a little combination of the two together. So I'm going to go back into what I did before, and I could do this later or I could do it now, but I'm going to just get some of this darker green and kind of go back over some of the lighter yellowish green that I did, which I think is too much. But I'm not going to go over all of it, because if you look in the reference, there's some places that are lighter than others. I mean, that's just normal for most things. So I'm just kind of looking around and seeing what stands out to me when I just look at the image for the reference, what kind of jumps out that I need to go in and fix. That's kind of how I paint most things. Even if I start off with my plan, I think it's always good to have a plan, but for me, a lot of the time it'll change pretty quickly. or it'll just have a few extra steps in the beginning before I get to the part that I was going to do, which is fine. Some other people would go about painting this a completely different way, which is also fine. And some people might just go over this very quickly with a much looser stroke, and if you like the way that looks, then nothing wrong with that either. I always tell people, some people think that there's only one way to paint and that's the way everyone has to do it, and that's true for certain things, but in most cases a lot of things could be done several different ways, and whatever works best for you is fine, as long as you like how it's coming out. Now what I'm also doing here, going over this again, I'm making it darker in some places, but I'm also going over the edge to make it a little bit more blended in, because basically having edges that are too hard just doesn't look as good, doesn't look as kind of refined. And Leonardo came up with something called the sfumato technique, which is where if you look at the Mona Lisa up close and his various other paintings, a lot of things are very, very soft. Even things that you would expect to have a hard edge are really blended so that it's very smooth, which you would think might make it look less realistic, but somehow it has the opposite effect. So part of what I'm doing here now is just blending some of these edges into the background a little bit more, and thinking, I like how this is looking more now. It's looking better. Of course, if it was getting worse, I'd be doing something wrong. My paintings always do go through what I call the ugly cry phase, though. There's something that I'm working on that just looks like a train wreck. I think a lot of people that are less experienced just get stuck on those moments and they just give up or start it over. You may start the same thing over and over again because you think it's just looking so awful, you must be doing something wrong. But if you're painting a person, anything you're working on, it's not going to look finished until it's actually finished. So there's going to be parts missing, and so that's just kind of part of the whole process. I feel like I kind of want to just go back and forth on this a little bit. I don't know if I should or not, because there are a lot of little trees going on in here. I think maybe I'm going to leave it for now. I might do that later. But I'm going to come over here to the left area, and these trees are much darker. So I might even want to go a little darker than what's up there now. But I'm going to put in the lights first. And the lights, there's a lot less kind of light areas on the left side, so I think they're also, the light areas are maybe not quite as bright as what's going on the left. So let me just take my brush now and bring some of this darker paint in here, and I could just have this over on the right side here. It doesn't really matter for what I'm doing right now, it's not complicated, but I'm going to just try this out before I go messing around with the colors on the palette and see how I like this right here. So I feel like that's pretty good for what I'm seeing on the reference. I'm going to just go in there. I think I'm going to just bring the dark paint over, actually. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring this over and make a gradient like I was talking about before. Sometimes the way you set up your palette can be very important, because it can be a real problem if it's not set up well. If it's just a mess and things are in places where they don't make sense, and you're having one color that's getting in the way of another one, it can really make everything harder. So it's not always clear what's the best way to set up a palette in the beginning, but like I'm adjusting mine now, this is only really going from one darker color to one lighter color. It's not a big deal, but there are other cases where you might be using a lot more colors and you don't know what's best in the beginning. I think I'm going to mix up a little bit more of this right here. So I can use this color. I don't know how much I'm going to need that at this point, probably a little bit more for a few things, but I can at least mix up some more of this darker version here that I'm going to use. It's pretty close. And so some other people wouldn't really mix on the palette very much at all. They might just get the colors on their brush from the palette and then mix it right on the painting. Sometimes I'll kind of do that too, especially if a color is very hard to get just right, but mostly I'll do it the way I'm doing it now. So I think there's these three lighter trees I can see. The tops of them are lighter and they're kind of standing out more over here. So I'm going to just mark them in there so I can kind of use them as a landmark to make sure everything else is in the right place before I get a tree that's too far to the left or something. I think I'm looking at this little peak up here also. I'm looking at this tree that's down this way. I think I maybe didn't get this in the right spot because it seems like this tree is a little too far to the left, but you know what? It's nature. No one will ever know if that tree is in the wrong place, or if you were taking a picture and you just stepped a few feet to the one side, maybe it would look just how I'm doing it now. It's not really a big enough deal to actually have to go back in there and change the mountain or something, so I think it's okay. I'm going to just leave that. So this is, so I'm focusing more on the trees down here on the left than I am on the mountain, even though it's not exactly the same. And plenty of people will paint things intentionally different than what they see in the reference, and that's fine too. You don't have to paint everything exactly the same unless that's your goal, but humans aren't cameras, so you don't have to do that. Now I'm kind of thinking, now that I'm doing a few more of these areas, I don't know if I might want to bring in some more highlights in there. It's looking a little bit close to this background area here, so I can see in the reference it's a little bit lighter there, but I think I'll do a few more of these areas with the one green I'm using. And I'll go back in there and just add some highlights. So it's a highlight in one area, maybe a shadow in some other area. Just depends on what looks like it's bright in that particular spot. So thinking I've got most of these things in here that I want to do on the left side. Definitely want to outline this on the top a little bit more, the way it is right over here. Doesn't have to be quite that noticeable, but something you want to make sure you do when there's one object or a structure or something in front of another. You have to make sure it's clear that one is ending and the other one's beginning in a certain spot. So I'm going to just add in a little bit of this lighter yellow here. Take a look at how that looks. Alright, so I'll do a little bit more right over here. And by the way, when I'm painting a lot of this, I'm just kind of using the corner of the brush, not really using one narrow side or the flat, wider side for this part. Just doing a lot of the narrower side for that area there. But this is going all right. This area over here on the left looks like it's more in the shadow. The sun's not really hitting it quite as much, so that sort of reinforces what I was saying of it probably being a little closer before. Looks like the water's going through over there. If it's closer to us, it may be more against the sun instead of these areas kind of over this way where the sun is hitting it more. If you have a different angle, the sun's not going to hit it the same way. So that's also sometimes part of what will make some depth, or make things just look like they make sense together. That's one of the hard things about painting and drawing in general, is just everything has to make sense together. You may have one area that on its own is fine, but together with the other part of the image doesn't really fit. So I think I'm definitely going to want to go over this shadow some more right here, which is fine. I probably didn't really paint it at the time, thinking that was definitely the darkest it needed to go, but either way, not a big deal. So I think I want to just outline this edge over here a little bit more. It's not totally clear in the reference, but I can maybe actually exaggerate that a little bit. I think I'm going to just go over this and make it extra light right here just to really separate that, because I can't really tell 100% for sure, but I'm pretty sure in the reference that's what's happening. So just to make it more obvious in the painting, I'm going to just emphasize that. If you're painting realism, you never want people to look at your painting and go, "What's that?" You know, that doesn't really ever help with what you're usually trying to do. Unless you're painting something that's intentionally supposed to be some kind of an illusion or something, that's probably not a good sign. So you want to make everything nice and clear. Or when somebody looks at something that you're doing and they say, "Is that supposed to be?" That never ends well also. Not that that ever happens to me. So I'm going to just lighten this part here a little bit more to really bring out the sort of sun hitting that area. Of course, I don't want it to be so different from the rest of it that it looks like it doesn't match, but it has to be solid enough and bright enough that it actually shows what's going on with the separation there. Now another thing, I think I'll do this now too. Another thing that you can see in the reference here is this kind of patch of grass right on the bottom, or something right on the edge of the lake. So I might want to wait a little bit to do that, but I'm going to do it now anyway. I'm going to just get a tiny bit more of this yellow here. I don't really need much, so I'm going to use my brush to get it. This is going to be very thin, and I'm going to actually go along the edge here just to paint that little bit of grass on the bottom, because that also is something that ends right where these darker trees are over here. So it's not quite as light as I probably need it. I'm actually going to get my palette knife for this. Trying to see if I can do this without getting more yellow yet, but I might need some more. Actually, that yellow is a little bit too runny. That's probably why I put it over there. Okay, get more yellow. And try a little bit of cat fur on my brush, or on my paint tube here I need to get off. Okay. Cat fur goes everywhere. When my paintings are done, I have to cover them or put them in a box so they don't have a layer of fur by the time I'm taking them off the easel. Anyway, so I just got some paint on my glove. I'm wearing a glove on the one hand just to protect it in case I get any paint on there. I really don't like wearing the glove at all, and I didn't until not too long ago, but if you're painting with toxic colors, it's a good idea. So I'll just bring a little bit of this over here. Again, just taking from this green that I mixed up already and making the lighter green out of that. If I didn't have all this going on the left side with the extra oily paint that I put over there, I could just put the yellow over there, but that's fine. Okay. So I've got a real chartreuse on the left. It's a fancy color a lot of people don't know. Okay, so that is definitely looking more where I want it. And the reason I was saying before I may not want to do this just yet is because it's such a straight line. I might have to go over it again later, but with all the reflections and things I'm going to be doing, it might interfere with that line a little bit and kind of disrupt the shape, so I might have to go back over it to clean it up. So I think maybe I want to just hint at that a little bit more over here. And this is going to go up just slightly. as it goes further back. And these areas over here on the right side should be just a little bit higher than over here. I don't know if it's going to end up being that way in the painting though. I guess I could probably push it up that way. Let me just kind of go over this part over here. What I'm doing with the brush, just going across like this, is alright with a filbert. Certain other kinds of brushes though, you wouldn't want to do that because it can really wreck them after a while. So, I guess this is working out alright. And I think I want to bring this light grass area over some more. Always good to remember to go back if I've been working too close. And see how it looks from further away. Okay. I want the grass to continue not just to the edge of this lighter part, but actually a little bit past there, because with the trunk of the tree on the edge, and the way the branches come out, if you look really closely on the reference, it's kind of got this kind of a shape right on the edge, so you can actually see the grass continuing in there just a little bit more. Okay, so I think that's enough of the grass for now, and I'm going to just break up this edge here a little bit because it's just too solid right now. So let me just get some of the darker green again. This might not be dark enough. Actually, no, this is not going to be dark enough for what I need. Anytime you're painting over wet paint, the new color you're using is going to mix with the wet paint. So you have to overshoot in order for it to just blend together on the painting and look like it's what you want in the end. If you're just painting on a dry surface, then whatever color you have on the brush is exactly what goes down there. But when it's mixing together, then the two are going to combine together to give you the way it looks, and depending on how much paint is already there or how much you have on the brush, you have to get just the right amount for the color that you need. So now this little area right here may not seem like a big deal, but for the amount of different things happening in the painting, this is kind of an important area, I think. Because you got trees, 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 you know, and then there's something different happening right here where there's more trees, but they're coming out. So anytime there's an image where, you know, there may be some details like in this one, but there's something unusual happening, that becomes more special, and sometimes that can help make a painting kind of dull. Well, not help it, that wouldn't be help. It would kind of make the difference between being dull or being successful. I don't think anybody helps by making things dull. So, I think this is looking better now over here. Just backing away from it. Sometimes you can't tell what's in the reference, so if you can't really see even what you're looking at in the photo, you don't necessarily have to figure it out, but then there's other cases where figuring it out can really make a big difference with getting it to look right, because there's certain things that you might realize after you paint it, oh, I can tell what that is now, and there's two things that don't line up where they're supposed to. So sometimes it's important, sometimes not as much. Let me just add some more darks in here. And again, I'm trying to keep this from getting too regular. There's a little bit of a darker area in the reference, then it's not quite as dark, and then there's this one tree that's kind of standing out more. In fact, I think I want to break up the edge up here a little bit more. There's this one tree over here, which is really noticeable if you look at it. It's got a big shadow on the right. And then there's this area where it kind of comes up a little bit more. Let me just up like this. And just hint at the sort of texture of the tree on the left there. And now I want to get rid of that one little mark I have next to it. So I'm going to just go in there and cut it out by going back over it. It has to be defined enough that I can tell this is the edge of a tree right here. It's not just kind of a random blob. And I think I want to also get rid of this little part right here. So this is pretty small stuff, but for this area here, there's kind of a lot going on. So it's going to need a little more attention to the small areas than some other parts of the image. I think this right over here, this little spot is competing a little bit too much, so I'm going to get rid of that too. You can keep going back and forth, covering things if you can see they're not really helping you. You just add lighter paint and then add darker paint and change it as many times as you need to. You can't do that with certain other mediums as much, like watercolors. But that's one of the nice things about oils. Okay, so feeling like now I want to bring out this dark shadow right here a little bit, which in the reference is actually kind of over this way more, but you know what, let me just get some more dark. I don't know if I want to maybe just go over this spot right here. Let me just connect this, and I think I need some more of the darker paint now. Yep. So it's kind of mixing together on the palette, so I need to just mix up a little bit more of the dark. So I'm just corralling it all together because it sort of spreads out eventually just from painting. And then this over here, go that way. So I don't really have any of the cadmium yellow in this part on the right. So I'm going to just wipe off on a little paper towel on the left here. And I'm going to just mix up some more of this darker color here. We'll get a little more Viridian. Viridian green, like I was saying, is a very popular color. Unless you're just kind of giving your overall painting that kind of look, that color, which some people do, like Jeremy Lipking, who's one of my favorite artists, it really doesn't look like hardly anything on its own. If you mix it with another color like this, it's useful as a green that you can use for painting, you know, plants and things, but until I came up with this combination for plants, I really had no idea even what to use Viridian for a really long time. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here now, and there's an area that's a little bit larger here that's dark that I want to bring out, just to kind of break this whole tree bunch up a little bit more. I may be getting a little bit too fixated on all these trees right now, but I feel like it's just kind of a little too general looking. It needs to have something standing out a little bit more somewhere. Bring this out a little bit more over here. And just a little bit more. I don't want to go too big with it so it looks weird. So now that I've done that, I'm going to add in a little bit more lights over this way also to sort of give that a bookend. Maybe a little light right there, a little too light. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the trees for the most part. Maybe I'll add in a little bit of these extra highlights over here since they're kind of looking still a little bit too dark compared to the area on the left side, or kind of the middle. So I'll just add a little bit. I don't really want to change it too much. Can't really tell exactly what I'm seeing there. I guess there's some bushes down there underneath the trees in this area on the reference. Okay, and I'm going to do a little bit over here. Got this one nice tree standing out kind of on its own right there, and I'm going to just get the edge on the right to stand out more. I'm going over that with some more light green. So then there's this kind of hill area going up over there. It looks like there's some, I don't know, wheat or something that's a lighter yellow color. I don't even know what that is. But I guess I might as well just finish off the edge on the right there, since I'm over here now. Maybe I'll just add a little bit more on the top right here to sort of solidify this. Make sure I don't go over my tree that I kind of singled out before. I'm going to kind of connect this a little bit more right here. Give it that sort of edge that's going across. Shouldn't be too flat because the trees definitely have that zigzag look. I think I need to go back in and just darken it a little bit, break that up some more. So, I'm going to keep going now with these, looks like, I guess more trees on the right. I was thinking for a minute it looks like bushes because it has the shape of a bush, but it's a little too big maybe for that. So around the edge here, I just outline it like this. And then there's another one. And right there. I want to keep this kind of general looking and just kind of tap in there some of the lighter parts I'm seeing. I don't think I need to do too much to it. Now, by the way, I'm holding the brush a little closer to the bristles now than I was talking about before, but because I'm doing this extreme detail, I kind of have a hard time. I mean, some people would do that, holding it on the other end, but for me I just hold it closer if it's something very small and kind of precise like that. So I'm liking how this came out right over here, so I'm not going to mess with that anymore. I think this other one, I think actually I'm going to add a little bit more dark in here, and then that'll be about it for that one too. Keep them kind of general looking as far as just this sort of spherical shape. And just extend this a little bit off the edge. And we go over the top with a little bit of lighter green, and it's fine. Okay, so now I think maybe that's enough for these trees. At least the ones on the kind of the back area. I'm going to do a little bit more on these here and then move on to the water, I think. So this part right here, I'm noticing is a little bit maybe lighter. I'm really trying not to hit my camera with my brush. That's probably inevitable. Just right over here. So I can kind of see sort of an outline of the trees on the left side. It's not extremely solid, but it's sort of showing up there. And that's going to be much more obvious once I go over all these trees on the left with more of the dark green. So I think I'll do just a little more of these lights and then I'll put that in there. So once again, just kind of letting the painting kind of tell me what it wants. It's like I had a great art teacher in high school named Myra Morrison. I had her for three-dimensional design. She was talking about just letting the clay tell you what it wants, and I'm sure when she said that I had some really snarky thing to say, but I understood what she meant, and it's like that with paint too. You may have an idea of what you think you're supposed to be doing, but it doesn't always work out the way you think. In reality, you have to just watch and see what it really needs. I guess cooking is like that, and lots of other things. You gotta see what's missing and then fill it in. Imagine raising kids is like that. Of course, I just have a herd of cats. They don't do anything you want, so that's useless. You can try. So, I'm going to do a little bit more over here on this one side, just to outline the one tree here. You can see kind of the branches almost individually standing out in that spot. And I'm giving it a little of a lighter area than is actually in the reference, but I like the way it's looking, so I'm going to just leave it that way. And then there's this part down here where it looks like maybe a bush or just a very young tree. And, gee golly, it's been an hour already. Does it seem like that for you? Well, if not, I guess that's a good thing. So, I'm going to give this a little bit more of a lighter color on the top here. Gotta be careful not to overdo it because then it doesn't really match what's going on. But actually, that's sort of how it looks in the reference, so I guess it's okay. Let me just go a little bit lighter up here also. And maybe it's time for the darker shadows now. Get some more of the dark paint, and first I'm going to just bring all this together. Okay. So something that happens sometimes when you're painting with oils is a layer might dry where it does something called sinking. That's where the layer looks lighter than it actually is. It just has a kind of matte finish, which is one of the biggest pain in the butt things about oils, but there's ways to kind of mitigate that. Sometimes when it happens though, you may not be aware of it, and if you paint over that area, you may think you're adding a new color that looks the same as what's there already, but then eventually you can see later on they don't really match. So this is not really dark enough, so I'm going to need to do something different here, I think. That's just the Viridian and the transparent yellow oxide, so I think that's just basically as dark as it goes there. So I'm going to need to either get some black or some other color to make it darker. Let me just see here, just to make sure it's not mixing with anything. I just put it right on the painting with the palette knife. Alright, so that's a little bit darker, but yeah, I'm going to get a little bit of black. Just scrape that off. So now I want to push this over to the side and bring this one over here, doing a little bit of palette musical chairs. Probably want to mix up a little bit more of this green. You have to be really careful with black whenever you're using it because it's very strong. If you use too much, it can just, oh, that's not supposed to be in there. It can just be a little bit overpowering. Bring this up this way. So if I was going to set this whole palette up again, I'd do it differently, but it's fine. I'm going to get some more Viridian also. Do a little more. Put the cap back on. You want to try to just have a little bit of space there for part of the cap that comes down so that it doesn't smoosh out over the edges, but inevitably that'll probably happen anyway. Definitely don't want air in there. So I'm going to get some black now. Personally, I don't really get too concerned about one black versus the other as far as if they turn warm or cool, which is, you know, like orangish or bluish basically. But they don't all mix exactly the same way together. If I could find my black, that would make it a lot easier to use it. Okay, here it is over here. So, I'm using natural black oxide, which is super strong, so you really only need a tiny amount of that. I'm not even going to squeeze it out. I'm just going to get it with the palette knife, put it down. Okay. You can do that also to avoid the paint getting stuck in the grooves of the cap or the spout. Just kind of like take a little bit out that way with the palette knife. Okay, and I'm going to just put a little bit of that in there. I think what I want to do is move this. On any cadmium in this new color I'm mixing because it'll just lighten it. Okay, so I'm going to just mix in a little bit of this black here. I'll just separate it to kind of compare it. This is how it is without black. And then over here, this is with the black, so I don't really need this for too many areas, mainly the trees on the left side there. I really like this color black because it doesn't really sink very much. This is the natural black oxide. I don't think many people really use this black compared to some of the others, but it's really good for drawing without sinking. So some people like to use multiple brushes while they're painting. Some people like just using one. It depends on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll use a few of them. Sometimes, like, I painted with as many as like 7 brushes at one time. Or, like right now, I'm just using one. Or the reason you might want to have more than one brush is if you're switching back and forth, and the one color can get in the other color that you're trying to use and create problems. I think I'm going to get a little bit more black in there because this is not quite dark enough yet. Okay, so let me just see if this is dark enough now. I think I definitely don't want to go darker than that. Something you have to be aware of though also is that photos tend to have more contrast than real life because cameras just work that way. In a lot of cases they'll increase the contrast. So certain places that look very dark for the shadows actually may not have been that way in real life. I think this might be a little too dark actually now that I'm putting on a few places. So I'm going to just come back the other way a little bit more. Maybe I don't want to put it on solid to cover as much. So there's definitely plenty of contrast right here, but I'm thinking maybe it's a little bit overboard right now, especially compared to the other parts of the image. Like I was saying, you want to be careful it doesn't stand out too much. I think I do want to maybe do a few little places in the back there that are slightly darker with a little bit of the black. But still probably I'm going to lighten this area on the left just a little bit. So I can use the black I'm using right now, or the green that has the black in it. I can use that sort of as a base, and then add some slightly lighter green to bring out a little bit of detail with branches or some texture. I think I want to blend a little bit of these edges here. So I'm going to just kind of tap on them a little bit, kind of blur that out. When you're first painting trees, pretty difficult because they have all the little leaves and lots of things happening, and the point of painting trees is not necessarily to paint every single little leaf, and if you do that then the painting might not necessarily even be as good as if you were just doing it in a more general way. So you have to kind of figure out what way works for you to do that looks nice and you're happy with. So you kind of group things together into larger shapes. In general, when you're painting, a good way to start out is to do what they call working big to small. So it's kind of that idea of just grouping things and not getting too detailed in the beginning. And of course I'm just going along and doing it sort of one section at a time, but I did have an area that was down there as a base before that, so I'm just doing basically the final area now. So before you do all the detailed stuff, you know, you want to have a layout, maybe block in the colors where you just have flat colors put in, or something not quite finished but just to cover where you're going to be putting something. Okay, so I'm going to go in now and do some of the darker areas in the background. And by the way, when you're doing this, a trick you can use with landscapes is to make the areas that are really far away lighter, like it is right here, and that's actually how it looks in the reference. If it doesn't look that way, you can always just add it kind of artificially, I mean, you know, to make it look natural, but you can just add it in as sort of a tool just to make things look like they're further back. So now that I'm doing this part right here, actually the mountain that I painted is looking much more like the right colors, so maybe I don't know if I will go back in there or not just to lighten some of this, but separating out something that's further away with some haze helps to make it look like it's further back and break up something that's, you can see such a long view of what's going on in the image. I'm going to just go in a little bit in a few places with this dark shadow, partly just so that the one on the left doesn't look like it's out of place, but partly because it's there anyway in the reference. I think that's almost enough. Just feeling like maybe a little bit more, I don't know, someplace right around here. I don't even know where it needs it, but maybe right over this way. Sometimes just the subtlest change is enough. It may not even be very noticeable, but it still kind of shows up. I definitely don't want to do any black in the mountain up this way, because that would bring it closer, and that's really not where it's supposed to be anyway. You can kind of see there's this one area where there's the mountain coming towards us right here. In the reference, it's a little darker right there, just like I have it in the painting, so you know, that's intentional. So I think now I'm going to just do a little bit more. You know, actually I'm going to bring this down lower on the left here, because with the perspective it should be coming down further away from the horizon line. The horizon line would be like right around here, maybe right around there. So as things get closer, they come down lower from that. And the horizon line is if you could just see the ocean, that's where the edge of the ocean would be. So let me just bring this down a little bit lower so that it's lower than this grass over here. Even though it's not really much different in the reference, maybe just a little bit, I'm going to just kind of bring that out some more because it just helps the image. And I'm going to just bring this paint together some more as it's getting thinned out on the palette. I want to get this pretty straight across here. It's still pretty high up. Things that are closer to the horizon line tend to be very horizontal. And you can see there's a few little rocks over there on the left side in the reference too, just kind of a couple gray rocks or something there. So I don't know if I really want to put them in. They don't look like they would necessarily help anything with the painting. They might look a little weird. Sometimes if things look weird that are in the reference, probably best to leave them out of the painting. Because if you can't even tell what it is when you're looking at the photo, it's probably not going to be obvious what it is in the painting either. So it'd be best to just skip it. I'm going to get a little bit more. I'm going to mix up some of this darker green and put it in there for the branches for this area on the left here. This is just the Viridian and the transparent yellow oxide here. Pretty dark on its own. And let's see if that's light enough compared to the mixture with the black. Maybe it's going to be enough. Actually, I can get a little more green. It's looking a little too brown. Transparent yellow oxide is really good for painting things that are gold, like blonde hair or any metallic gold kind of objects or things like that. I'm thinking it's going to be too dark on its own, so I'll add a little bit of the cadmium in there. So this is obviously lighter than I need, but let me just see how much I actually need, because it's going to mix with the color I put down since it's still wet. I'm going to just kind of try to do this without going too extreme with the details. When you have different areas in the same painting, there's a light area that has a range of light and dark, and then there's a dark area that has a different range also, and you can see things happening in there. I feel like that's really a nice way to make it look really sophisticated, instead of just having the shadows just kind of be all dark and there's nothing really going on in there. So you don't always have that, but when you do, it looks really good. I'm not sure if this color is a little too warm here, actually. I don't know. Feeling like maybe I want a little more green, so let's try this with some more green. I'm just going to put basically the Viridian right in there. I feel like that was too warm. I think that's maybe a little better. If anything, when you have shadows in a landscape, you want these shadows to probably be cooler, because you have the blue of the sky, which is coming down, and it's coloring the shadows, even if you don't see it in the sunlight. When the sun is not hitting something, it becomes more obvious. You can really see that when there's pictures of the woods when it's snowed and there's shadow areas in the snow. They look really blue after the snow is all done coming down. You can really see that. And that light is always there, you just can't see it as much unless there's white snow down there or something else that's light. And I also don't want to overdo it and make this too cold. so that it looks like it doesn't match the other dark color I put down. So I'm still just looking at this whole area and seeing what looks like I can make it lighter now. Back up. Looks like an earthquake's happening on the camera because it's vibrating, but I think that may be okay the way it is. It's pretty dark compared to the rest of the image, but that's pretty much where I'm seeing it on the reference, so I'm going to paint in more things down underneath here, and it'll maybe match a little bit more. We've got some places where you can see there's like some of these shadows in the rocks. Over here, there's some dark shadows on the edge of the rocks, and then there's also some kelp or something that's in there. So there's a whole area on the right side that's reflecting from the sky, so that's just going to be lighter, so you're not going to have too many darks in there. But there's a few places, and some of the shadow in here also will just reflect the dark of this one little tree and some other places. So I think maybe I'll leave it the way it is right there. I'm going to just go over this one little spot a little bit more, because I feel like it's standing out too much. Just move this over. Since I just hit my stand. Okay. So, just going to tap the edge of this one little bush or whatever it is here. Maybe it's just a young tree. Okay. Okay, so I'm feeling like this edge on the left is done with the trees. I'm going to just go back there and touch up the grass right here because I did kind of disturb it a little bit before. So I'm going to just keep using the same brush here. It's got a little bit of the black on there, so I'm going to try to just wipe off my brush now on a paper towel to avoid it getting into the lighter green. Just go back over it, and actually seeing there's a bunch of little kind of nondescript things that are down there towards the bottom. Maybe I'll just tap them in very lightly. know, I think I need to actually go over this edge right over here just a little bit more because it's not really defined enough as it is, so I just go in there like that. Edges are very important for a lot of things. They're very small compared to the rest of the image, but they tend to be surprisingly kind of influential of like the way things look. Back when I first heard somebody talking about edges and how important they are, I didn't really believe it at first, but then I started noticing when I was paying attention to things I was looking at and when I was painting, and I tried adjusting edges to make them sort of blended a little bit more. It definitely is true. It's very surprisingly true that it makes a big difference. So I think I'm going to do this little area over here. There's some, I can see a little building or something, like a little farmhouse maybe. Not going to put that in there, but just paint that sort of light yellowish area there. So I think I can do that actually with my less of the Viridian and then more of the transparent yellow oxide together with the cadmium yellow. I'm really using a very small amount of paint here. A lot of people would use a lot more, but I think this is good for me. And I think that's looking a little bit too brown. I'm going to get a little more yellow. You know, this is Sweden actually. I guess, what are they known for? Growing a lot of flowers. That might be a flower field over there, some kind of tulips or something. Is that Sweden or Switzerland? One of those places. So I'm going to just paint it in there, and whatever it is, that's just what it looks like. Okay, so a little bit, go a little bit more yellow and a little bit lighter. This is just a really small little window here. It's actually bigger on the reference. I'm liking how these trees look though, so I don't want to disturb them. So I think I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Need to get a little bit more of the yellow in the paint there. This is a very limited palette I'm working with right now. I've only got, well, 3 colors. That'd be 4 if you count the black, but I'm not really using that too much. I don't know why I'm hearing myself all of a sudden. Somehow maybe something got changed on my computer just now. But working with a limited palette sometimes can be easier than working with a lot of different colors. It's just simpler sometimes, but you're limited in some ways, so it kind of can keep things more unified where it looks like it goes together more also. I think I'm going to just flatten this out on the bottom a little bit right here. And hopefully this looks like it's a little window showing through to the field on the other side. Thinking maybe I need to bring this line up a little bit more right here. Now I like this little tree or whatever it is over here, how that came out, but it seems like there's just something, it's not enough as it is right now to really be able to tell what's happening on the right here, so I have to just change something around. Maybe I think what I'm going to do, I think I want to actually go up here, maybe just add in a little bit more of the field up on the top, maybe over this way. It's getting really close to the edge, which may be covered up by a frame if it's, ever going to be framed, which, hopefully it would. But I feel like I need to do something here to just make this more clear that there's a field behind these trees on the right. Softening the edge on the left side of this one tree. And the same thing on the other side now, just making the edge less defined. I think I maybe did a little bit too much on that one, so I'm going to go back in and darken the bottom area. I do like it better with the part on the top added in there to show that the field is continuing up that way. Of course, I don't really know if it should be or not, but anyway. I'm going to just add a tiny bit right over here also. I feel like it just needs something more to show this is an area behind these trees. Sometimes it's aggravating if you get really there's a part that you really like the way it looks, but you just see that it's clear something needs to be taken out in order for the whole image to look the way it needs to. I'm going to bring this top edge here up a little bit. Okay, and I think I like that better. Just add a little more separation right here to show more of that yellowish color. Okay, I think that's alright. And I just blend this top edge just a tiny bit so it's not as hard. That's another thing with the edges. If you have a light area, like a light color next to a darker color, that's one of those things you have to watch out for to make sure it's not too conspicuous, because then if it's something you're not supposed to be looking at right away, it might be kind of fighting and competing for attention with whatever, say like the mountaintop or whatever you're supposed to be looking at. That'd be called the focal point. So I'm going to add in a little bit more down here now. A little darker. Okay, I think that's working, and maybe I'll add in the grass over here on the right. Might as well. And if I have to go over it again later on, that's fine. It's no big deal. Of course, I think I'm going to be stopping soon, so if it dries, then it's not going to get smudged anyway later on. So So this can come over here and around there. It's looking like the water is pretty straight in that spot on the reference. It goes up a little bit on a hill there for the grass. Again, I would prefer not to really paint over these little trees on the right so much because I like how they look, but it just needs to have this little area added in there. And you can see it looks like there's something going along the edge on that side where maybe the yellow or whatever that field is coming out. I don't know. But it's pretty close to how I think it's supposed to be. So maybe I'll bring it down a little bit more, a little bit darker yellow or yellowish green. I'm going to go back in there and just adjust the edge a little bit more down here, just to get it a little bit less defined again, like some of the other parts. I ordered some really fancy mics, so next time hopefully they will have arrived and you won't have to hear the air conditioner blasting like a jet engine in the background like you probably can now. So that'll be nice. And then you won't miss any of my incredibly interesting little fun facts and comments. Okay, so I think that's looking good the way it is now. Maybe I'll just do a little more right here. And I'm liking that. Okay. So, I think, just checking over. It's always good to just look at an area after you've worked on it and you feel like you've kind of gotten everything right. Just check it and see if there's anything that really needs to be fixed or adjusted. Because sometimes when the paint is dry, then you can still do that, but something may take like 30 seconds while it's wet, or it may take 10 minutes while you have to go back in there and redo everything if it's dry already. Okay, so I'm going to just do a little bit of this grass out here still. Right along this edge. If you wanted to really think about how the light is hitting things and plan that out in the painting, you could kind of look at where the light is hitting some of the trees, and maybe there's a shadow someplace where it gets darker to the right of that tree. I don't really see that happening, well, maybe somewhat in some places in the reference there, so right over here. It may not always be extremely clear though. definitely do tend to see a hard edge on the edge of water a lot of the time, whether it's grass or rocks or whatever it is. Pretty typically you can see some kind of line right there, and then the reflection or whatever is below there. Okay, well, I think that's about it for the grass. And I'm going to say that's going to do it for today. So, I think you've had enough. So, basically, I think the trees are pretty much done now. I'm going to go back in there and work on the water next time and look at those reflections, and there's the little rocks that are poking out above the water, reflection of the sky on the right side. So, hope to see you next time. Thanks for joining me, and if you're a painter, you want to try out some of the things I talked about, it's good to do it pretty soon before you forget. If you're just here to just watch for the sheer entertainment value, that's fine too. Okay, see you next time, maybe.